Hi everyone. Very often with my work and my journeys and my interests, I keep them to myself. And although I post stuff online, I only do it to some stuff and keep a lot of other stuff, to myself, like keeping my cards close to my chest. And that's because I often feel that by talking about stuff, you lose momentum, you lose dynamism. And there's a project that I'm very interested in, which relates largely to my grandfather, the Sardar Ikbar Ali Shah, and to my father as well, Idris Shah. And because of them, and because of their own adventures a long time ago, a century ago, and half a century ago or more, I recently visited the Middle East, and I found myself at a place called the Murabba Palace in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. In 1926, when he was a relatively young man, my grandfather, Ikbar Ali Shah, was invited to Riyadh as a guest of King Abdulaziz ibn Saud. This was 1926, so it was just before Saudi Arabia was formed. It was then the Kingdom of Najd, of which Riyadh is the capital. And my grandfather attended the All-Muslim Conference in Mecca, and he spent time alone with King Ibn Saud and wrote about it for the Times newspaper in London, and also in his books, Westward to Mecca and Controlling Minds of Asia, and a number of others as well, including Alone in Arabian Nights. My grandfather was really struck by King Abdulaziz. King Abdulaziz was a towering man. I think he was 6'3" or 4. And he was, my grandfather had said, one of those very rare individuals who can unite peoples with his charisma and his foresight and his ability to see beyond limitations. In 1950, my father, Idris Shah, was invited by King Abdulaziz, who was then older, quite elderly. He was invited to the Murabba Palace, to the Majlis at the Murabba Palace, and he was received by King Abdulaziz. He wrote an account of his visit in his book, Destination Mecca, and he was awarded with a piece of the Kiswa cloth, which I actually have here, which covers the Kaaba in Mecca and is changed once a year. And he was also awarded a bisht, a robe, the royal robe, which King Abdulaziz gave to honored guests and members of his family. In visiting the Murabba Palace, I was incredibly moved to be in a place where my father and my grandfather had spent time with King Abdulaziz ibn Saud. And I was moved by the simplicity of it all. There was no bling bling. There wasn't even air conditioning. There were ceiling fans. There were simple carpets on the floor and those old-fashioned telephones in one corner, a very large radio set. And the entire palace is adobe. It's mud and straw. And for me, it was like something out of The 1001 Nights. It was the kind of thing that I had grown up reading about. A royal divan, a majlis, where humble people would come and seek the advice of the king in distant lands. And as I stood there in the majlis, in the court, I reflected on how my father had described it, that when he turned up and was invited in, he realized that he didn't have a gift for King Abdulaziz, and usually it's customary to bring a gift to when you visit a king. So he knelt down before the king, and my father said, "Your Majesty, Providence has decreed that I would come without a regular kind of gift, and instead I present myself to you," he said, "to be your servant for the rest of your days." And King Abdulaziz, my father said, smiled wryly out of the corner of his mouth. And he said, "Idris, first of all, I return you to yourself. Thank you for this precious gift. And secondly, sit down beside me as my son."